My name is Luke Wanek. I am an agroforestry specialist with the Agroforestry and Woodlot Extension Society. We have a very long name, so we go by the acronym AWES, or AWES. And I'm talking to you today about how you can build for the bumbles, how you can create habitat for bumblebees and other pollinators. And I'll be explaining what that is in a second here. And how you can also install a bumblebee house in that habitat. And this presentation is particularly for kids who have gotten bumblebee kits and seed packets from Grand Prairie County. And Grand Prairie County is sponsoring this presentation, which we're really grateful for. But it's relevant for anybody, any family who is looking to increase habitat for bumblebees and other pollinators here. So so welcome, and hopefully we'll learn how to do that here. Just wanted to start with who AWES is, who this organization is. We're a nonprofit, and we work to increase awareness of the various values, the economic, social, and environmental values of trees in the landscapes. So anything to do with trees and agricultural landscapes, we try to help farmers, landowners, and other people sort of get acquainted with, learn the benefits of, and learn how they can realize those benefits on their land. And so pollinators is one thing that trees and other habitat can help support and be good for. So what I'm going to be talking about today here, I'm going to be starting with what is pollination. So what is this thing that we're concerned about here? Then getting into the habitat needs of pollinators. So what do pollinators need to survive? Then I'm going to be zooming in on a particular kind of pollinator, which is bumblebees. And then afterwards, we'll be talking about how you can build bumblebee houses and install them wherever you might want to. I just wanted to start with talking about what pollination is. So what is pollination? So when you think about basically pollination is how many plants make baby plants. So if you think about humans or other animals, how they make babies, it involves male and female, mom and dad coming together and bringing sort of contributing half of their parts through sex, and making baby humans or bears or any other animal there. And plants can't come together in the same way because plants are stationary; they stay in one place. And so through time, they've enlisted help from other animals that can move, and typically things like bees and wasps and things like that will come and transfer pollen from the male parts of a plant. So the male parts of a plant is the anther, and that's the little kind of narrow things here, all the way into the female parts of the other plant, or even the same plant sometimes. And then it'll mix and mingle. The male and the female will contribute their parts, and then it'll produce seeds from there. And then those will will grow into new baby plants. So pollinator is any animal that will help a plant transfer its pollen so that it can make more baby plants. And it turns out that 3 out of 4, so 75% of all plants, they need help from pollinators to do this. They can't do it by themselves. And so pollinators are really important. And without them, 3 out of 4 of our flowering plants here, they wouldn't be able to make any babies. All right, so really, really important. So just to give you a sense, like all of these foods, these different plant foods or whatever, from blueberries to carrots, all those things wouldn't exist if we didn't have pollinators. And so we would be pretty hungry without them. And that's not just to say that we're the only ones who need pollinators. Other animals, like let's say this chickadee here, they eat other plants as well, or use other plants for habitat that depend on pollinators. And so without pollinators, not only would we not be able to eat, but all these other animals wouldn't be able to too. And our environment and our sort of whole world would be completely different and a lot less diverse, and we probably wouldn't even be there. So, okay, who's pollinated? So I kind of mentioned bees are a common pollinator, and when people think about bees, they often think about the European honeybee. These honeybees, they live in hives, bees produce honey. Everybody always thinks about that. And that's really important because, honeybees are a really important pollinator. They're one, and they're used a lot in agricultural landscapes. They'll bring around hives to different flowering crops. So these hives are these white boxes here, And then the bees will travel out from those hives and pollinate the flowers here. This is canola. But bees are not these honeybees are not the only kind of bee, and bees are not the only kind of pollinator either. Honeybees get a lot of credit, and because people know them. But I want to talk particularly today about what I call native bees. And native bees are other kinds of bees. So they're still bees, but they're not honeybees, and they're native to Alberta, to this landscape. And by that I mean they have evolved here. They've been here for a very long time, and they're adapted to the ecosystem here. And so there's actually a heck of a lot of native bees in Alberta. There's over 300 species actually of different bees. So honeybees is just one species that are not even native to Alberta. They're brought in from Europe. But there's over 300 species that are native to here. And that's actually more species, that's twice as many species as all of the species of mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and birds combined. So there's a lot of species of bees here, all right? We got a lot of diversity. And they're really efficient at pollinating. They really help plants out with pollinating quite a bit because they're so adapted to our conditions. They can kind of withstand the Alberta's crazy early falls and late springs, and they can pollinate in colder conditions and in wetter conditions than honeybees and things like that. And so, yeah, they're really sort of they're really important, but they're often overlooked because everybody pays attention to honeybees. And so before going on, I'm talking about bees here. So a lot of different species. I just want you guys to think to yourselves as you're watching this, like, yeah, which one of these is not a bee? Because bees kind of can look differently. So think to yourself, don't have to answer this now, but we'll come back to it in a second. Which one do you think is not a bee? Is it this one is not a bee? Is this one not a bee? This one not a bee? Or this one not a bee? Okay, just keep your answer in your mind here. And we'll go to the next slide. So it turns out that this one on the top left here, this is not a bee. This is actually a fly, a hoverfly, that looks a lot like a bee, but it's not. And these other ones around here, this is a halictid bee, a bumblebee, and a lasioglossum bee. Lasioglossum bee, this is a teeny tiny little bee. This is a wild rose petal for a sense of scale. So this is very, very small. So bees, I want to just show you here because bees come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. And from the small little gladioglossums to the big bumblebees, and yeah, in this case, this is a hoverfly. So it looks very similar to a bee, but it's not. And how you tell a bee is a bee is, well, you look at to see whether it has 4 wings or just 2 wings. So this hoverfly, it only has 2 wings that are splayed out kind of in its back, and the bees, they have 4 wings, which you can't really see here from this picture, but they have 4 wings that are tucked behind them when they land. All right, so they tend to keep them more behind them, whereas the flies, they splay them out like that. And flies have big eyes that are more towards the front of their head. Bees have kind of smaller eyes that are more towards the side of their head there. So when you're out, hopefully in the springtime pretty soon, you'll start to see bees around, and you can start to tell which ones are bees around you as you look around for insects. Which is not to say that the hoverflies or other types of insects are bad or they're not valuable in any way. There are a lot of different kinds of pollinators out there. So including flies, birds like hummingbirds, beetles, moths, butterflies, wasps, including bees. There's many different kinds of insects that help with pollination, help the plants basically make more baby plants. But I just wanted to show you this because bees are the sort of the most important. They do the most transferring of pollen out of any other species, so or group of species, I should say. So this part 2, I'm going to be talking about what are the habitat needs of pollinators. So habitat is a fancy word for kind of like home. So what do pollinators need to have a good home that they'll be able to survive in? Well, like us, pollinators need food, they need shelter, and they also need safety. And for them, their food is pollen and nectar, not the kinds of foods that we would normally eat directly. They shelter, they need good places to nest and overwinter. And for safety, they need an environment that's free of pesticides, so free of chemicals that could hurt them. And so to ensure you got to have good food, and ensure reliable access to pollen and nectar, what we recommend if you're looking to create a nice home for bees is to getting a lot of different flowering species together and planting a lot of them, or maintaining a lot of flowering species that have diverse shapes, sizes, colors, and bloom period. So all these different flowers here, from the wild rose here to the yarrow here, chokecherry there, like these are all different kinds of flowers. They look different. Different bees, just like people, you all have your favorite colors maybe. Bees and other pollinators do as well, and they're attracted to use different flowers. Some can access very deep flowers, get their tongues way deep there to suck up the nectar and get the pollen that's in there. And others can get use more shallow flowers here. And I should mention, when pollination happens, the bees and the other pollinators are doing a service for plants. They're transferring pollen and helping them make babies. And in return, the plants give the pollinators a gift, and they give that gift as a little bit of nectar, which is like this little sugary drink that the pollinators can slurp up. And they also sometimes some of the pollinators eat the pollen itself. They don't usually eat it all, but they eat some of it, and then the rest of it they transfer to the next flower. So it's kind of like a nice little bargain. The plants get to make more baby plants, and the pollinators get to have a little they get their food that way. And I want to just highlight here, so you want to have diverse shapes, sizes, colors, and bloom periods. And bloom periods is particularly important to make sure you have flowers with a whole bunch of different bloom periods. And I'll try to explain this chart here, why that's the case. So what we have in this is like kind of a fancy graph. And on the left-hand side, we have all of the different bee genera, which is a fancy name for bee types. So different groups of bees. And then we have on the bottom here, we have the months through the growing season: April, May, June, July, August, September. And then the arrows here are when these different bee types are flying and they're actively looking for pollen nectar. They're actively looking for food during the season. All right. And then this yellow kind of bar that happens right in July here, it's going in July, that's when canola, this yellow flower in the background here, that's when that is actively in bloom. All right. So what I'm trying to show you with this graph is that all these bees are flying for other months, except beyond when canola is flowering. So if there was only canola around, they would only have food for that part of July when canola is flowering. All right. They would have nothing to eat for the rest of the time. And so what we're looking for, instead of having just a single crop, a single type of flower in your ecosystem, is we're looking to have, okay, this is a different kind of chart here. And again, we have April, May, June, July, August in the bottom here. And we have, in this case, a whole bunch of different species of plants. So we have everything from raspberry here to rose, chokecherry, these different plants. And these bars show when they are blooming, when their flowers are out. All right, so some bloom in the early spring and some bloom later on throughout the season. And so this is a much more better picture for bees, because they can go and start foraging starting in the early season with, let's say, buffalo berry flowers early on, and then moving on to willow or something for a long time. They can be eating the pollen and nectar from willow, and then later on they can move into other species. And so it's a great sort of diversity that will help attract more flowers and give them a source of food throughout the growing season. They can keep on shifting over to different species. All right, so that's another a thing to consider. You want to make sure you have, for habitat, a lot of diverse species with bloom periods throughout the season. And then you have, so native, kind of a key thing here is native flowering species are ideal. So I mentioned that we're talking about native bees here, or bees that have been here for a long period of time, native pollinators. And if you ensure that they have native flowers to eat pollen and nectar from, then that's really good for them, because they know how to use them. You know, they've had that kind of food in their system for a long time. So a native flower is simply a flower that has been here in Alberta or in your region for a very, very long period of time, and the bees are adapted to it. They're used to that kind of food. In the same way you might be used to eating certain kinds of food because you've been eating it all your life. So we actually have a fact sheet on recommended native pollinator-friendly plants for the Aspen Parkland. And that's linked below below this video here. And I also wanted to highlight, if you're interested in purchasing any, I know as part of this project you got native seed, or you got seed packets, which I think are just a mixture of native and non-native seeds. But if you're interested in purchasing more native species from closer around your area, recommend going to the Alberta Native Plant Council's website. This is, there's an Excel spreadsheet here you can download to get local sources of native flowering species in your area. Okay, that was all about food, which is the most important thing for pollen and nectar for our wild pollinators. And then the other thing to think about for pollinators is shelter. So it turns out that, well, a lot of people think of bees as living in hives, and that's the case with, especially with honeybees. They build their big hives and they have a honey there. But it turns out a lot of our native bees, they nest in the soil. They'll almost dig these things that kind of look like little ant burrows that go into the soil, and they'll have little, they'll lay their eggs down there, and they'll provision each egg. They'll give each egg a little bit of food in the form of pollen and nectar, and they'll make that, and the eggs will be in these little cells, and they'll hatch, and they'll eat that pollen and nectar, and they'll grow bigger, and then they'll eventually turn into an adult bee. All right, so a lot of them nest in the soil, and so they need undisturbed soil. All right, you can't be tilling up or breaking up the soil in places where these bees are nesting, because it'll destroy their homes. And then other bees will nest above ground in old beetle burrows or the old tree snags or something like that. It's not the best picture here, but what I'm getting at is, if you ever looked at an old like stump or something like that, and you've seen little trails that go through it where insects have made those sort of holes burrowed into it, bees will use that and make their homes inside there. And they might make their homes out of leaves, and again, pack it with, give each egg pollen and nectar so it can eat it when it grows into a little larvae here, or they'll use mud or some other material to make their homes, and then these bees will turn into adults as well. And then the final thing that bees and other pollinators need is protection from pesticides. So not spraying any pesticides that could accidentally kill any native bees around there, making sure that you're far away from that, or there's not any of that going around. That's really important as well. Okay, so I'm now going to jump into part 3. So I'm going to talk about the life cycle of a particular kind of pollinator, the bumblebee. And yeah, this is the kind of focusing on this because this is kind of associated with building a bumblebee house, and you can kind of promote bumblebees especially. And so yeah, bumblebee is just one kind of pollinator. Actually, there's 23 species, or actually I think there's 27 now. There's a few more species have been found in previous years in Alberta. It's in that range anyways. But yeah, we'll be looking at how they live their lives in particular, so that you know how to build a good house for them. All right, so bumblebees in particular. So bumblebees around this time of the year, so starting about in this next month in April, I'm giving this presentation right here at the end of March. They'll start to look for nests, and they'll emerge from their hibernation. They'll be hibernating just like a bear hibernates, sleeps over the winter, and they'll be looking around for old rodent burrows, for underneath deadfall, in thick grasses, in the hollow of a tree, anywhere that's warm and dry and close to good food sources. So close to good pollen and nectar, good flowers that they can use. All right, so and these are the queen bumblebees. All right, so she'll be looking around for these kinds of areas. Then when she finds one, she'll start laying her eggs in there and provisioning them with pollen and nectar. All right, and so she'll be giving each like making these balls of pollen and nectar or cells, and then provisioning each of them with each of the eggs inside with a bit of pollen and nectar for them to eat. And she'll even make herself, this is called a little honey pot, even though she's not a honeybee. She'll make this kind of nectar solution, and she'll sip it while she's sitting on the eggs. And she'll sit on these eggs just like a bird would sit on eggs. And she has to keep them warm so they'll hatch. So she'll kind of vibrate on them just enough to keep make sure that everybody stays warm, and they'll hatch. And it'll take 4 to 5 days for them to hatch, and 4 to 5 weeks for them to go from eggs to full mature bees that can help her out. So right now she's all by herself, and she's laying these eggs and getting her colony started. And then from May to August, so after this started, we have the rise of the worker bumblebee. So these are also females, but they're not queens. They're just helpers. They help to guard and give food to and tend to the nest. All right, so they'll kind of look after things, and the queen, meanwhile, will still be laying her eggs, but she'll have a whole bunch of helpers to help her maintain the nest as you go. All right, so that colony will grow and grow and grow up to maybe a few hundred, well, a couple hundred individuals, more likely around 100 or less. So that's kind of how big it can get. And then come July, so midsummer, the queen will start laying new eggs that will turn into both queens and male bumblebees. So the males will they'll all hatch, and then they'll leave their nest, and then they'll find new mates. They'll find other queen females to mate with, and then they'll basically those queens will be able to start a new nest and lay the eggs for a new nest the next spring. Males won't last very long. They basically mate, and then they pretty much die. And at that point, when the males are first introduced, the males don't really help out with the nest guarding and the helping like the workers do. And so once the males are start to be laid, the organization and attending to the nest, it kind of disintegrates and it becomes a little bit more unruly. But yeah, that's kind of towards the end of the summer there. So the male, this is a male here and mating with a queen. All right, so they're basically making new bumblebees for the next year. And then in August and September, the mated queen seeks a hibernation site. So the mated queen will be slurping up nectar and pollen throughout the fall, and then just before it gets cold, she'll maybe dig into the ground a bit or under some leaf litter or something like that, and stay there over winter. And she manages to survive, which is crazy. And then everybody else will die. Everybody else, the queens, the old queen, the workers, and the male bumblebee will all they'll all die away. They only live for a very short amount of time. That new queen will come and then wake up in the springtime again around this time, and then make a new nest, and the cycle continues. So you can kind of see that cycle here. So the mated queens, they seek their overwintering sites. They hibernate over the winter. In the spring, they establish their nest and they're laying eggs. It grows bigger and bigger, and then the old queen dies, and then everybody else actually dies, and the new queens will mate with the new males, and then they'll seek overwintering sites. They'll seek a place to hunker down over the winter and hibernate, and then they'll come back out. So that's kind of the cycle we're talking about here. Okay, and the last part, I'm just going to go quickly through how you can build bumblebee houses so that these queens can, or these bumblebees can live in them, and you can kind of see how they do over the year. We have a fact sheet on doing bumblebee houses, building and installing bumblebee houses, which a lot more detail will be included. So I just want to go through the basics here. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to mimic natural nesting sites. So the queen would look for naturally in nature like the hollow of a tree. We're trying to mimic that so that she uses our site as well, and so we can have them and observe them, just like we would like a birdhouse or something like that. And so what we want to do is, once you've built your bumblebee house, and there'll be instructions in that fact sheet, you want to install it in the early spring, so March to May. So now is a great time, in a cool, secure place. So not in the hot afternoon sun, but in a secure place. That's maybe a bit more shaded, but where there's lots of flowers nearby, so that maybe there's lots of reason for a bumblebee to be in the area, and they'll pass by and use the house. So here's you can put it on a tree, strap it to a tree. Somebody strapped it underneath their deck here. Now there's a little bumblebee actually using it here. So you can build these houses, and then all the way in October, I wouldn't really bother these nests too often in the summer, just in case there are bees there. But in the fall, in October, you can check to see if the bees have used the house. And so you open up, and the cotton that's been provided with you should be in the house, and you might find that there's cells in it like this. And if there's something like this inside, that means that the bees have used it. And you can count how many cells there were to see how big the colony got over the season. And everybody should be gone by then, or died. There shouldn't be any live bees in there anymore, which is natural. That's part of their cycle. And if they did use the house, then you just have to clean it out with a mild bleach solution, so that there's no diseases that transfer to the next year, and make sure you don't reuse the cotton. So don't don't allow the cotton to be used. This is just a one-time use sort of thing if you have it colonized. And then you may be lucky enough to find like some dead bumblebees in there, some bumblebees that kind of were there during the season and then they died in the fall. And if you do that, you can maybe be able to identify what bumblebees those are. And there's another link below, identification guide for bumblebees of southern Alberta. And yeah, you can sort of see the different colors. There's a whole bunch of different species of bumblebees out there. This is of southern Alberta, but there's a lot of overlap into central and even into the northwest a little bit too. It's not perfect, but it's something we got here. Yeah, you can kind of see which species were there. And then the whole idea is plant flowers and see what happens. So start with your bumblebee house, and maybe over the years you can establish more and more habitat, more flowers, so they can use the pollen and nectar, and see if the numbers grow in the colonies, if you have more boxes that get used, and all that sort of thing. So that's the end of my presentation here. And if you have any questions, feel free to visit our website at awesab.ca or email info@awes-ab.ca. But good luck with your bumblebee boxes and establishing habitat.